All right, today we're going to be going through a carburetor on a mid-90s Bayou 300 four-wheel drive. Four-wheel drive is going to be the same as the two-wheel drive, and majority of the 90s and early 2000s, even the late 80s, are going to have the same carburetor setup. So what we're going to do first is pull this choke cable off. We've already obviously disassembled it from the four-wheeler and just disassemble it from the choke lever here on the handlebars. Now what you're going to do is take a 12mm wrench, and it's a plastic nut, so just be careful when you're removing it, and especially careful when you're putting it back together that you're getting a good hold on it with your wrench there, so you're not rounding that off. And then also want to make sure you thread it on with your fingers to get it started, so that you're not using a wrench and having it cross-threaded from the beginning. So then you can go ahead and pull it out, and there is your choke cable with your plunger there. Now to get this choke plunger off, you've got to push the spring back slightly, just past that plunger, and then and it's hard to do when it's coiled up like this, or when the choke is engaged. So once you get that spring past this tip here, then you can just slide that cable out the back. Then those pieces will actually come off, and you've got your choke, plunger, cap, and spring all together. Now the next thing we're going to do is pull this bottom bowl off, and we've got 4 Phillips screws on the bottom of this carburetor, and pulling these 2 off here will remove your idle adjust mount. So just remember where those go back together. So these screws, you don't have to get them extremely tight. I loosened them slightly so that this video would go a little bit quicker, but you want to make sure that they're snug so they don't fall out. But you've got a rubber gasket, a rubber seal sealing this bottom bowl up, so you don't have to tighten them down too much. Here's your idle adjust here. Here's your bottom bowl. Just pull that off, and just these 4 screws here are the ones that were removed. Here's your O-ring I was talking about. You want to make sure that's in good condition, not cracked, not dry rotted. This is your overflow line right here. If fuel is constantly dumping into your carburetor, it's going to come out this tab here, and it's going to come out the bottom of your carburetor here. And these occasionally you'll see them leaking right here, and you'll just have to replace your entire bowl. This port here comes with the bowl when you order it from Kawasaki. So also a way to drain your carburetor. If you're done riding for the year, you can go ahead and just pull this Allen bolt here, just take it a couple turns out, fuel will start draining out here. Obviously you want to shut fuel petcock valve off that's on your fuel tank, or it's just going to drain your entire tank of fuel. Also you want to make sure you've got a hose connected up here that runs underneath of your four-wheeler, because if you're bouncing around out on the trails, fuel will drip out here, land on your motor, could potentially start a fire, or nothing else that'll discolor your motor, take the paint off. So we've got your main jet here, and this is what we call a secondary main jet here, and then your idle jet is clear down in here. Your main jet is going to be your largest jet, and this is going to be, I believe, in the this is going to be in the 130 range, so either 128, 132, 126 maybe, 134 maybe, depending on altitude and riding conditions. So your main jet is actually just this top one up here. This is your main jet holder. A lot of times they come out together. Even if they do, you can leave that main jet holder connected onto it. Take carbon choke cleaner, and I prefer this Gum Out brand. Spray through this, and then take compressed air and blow through it as well. You want to make sure that when you hold this jet up to light, you can see through it. All your jets will be that way. Your secondary main jet, this is going to be the 58 to 60, 62 maybe size jet, so it's going to be a smaller port than your main jet. And you can see them, if you hold them up side by side, you can see the difference in the size. Again, you want to make sure though that you can blow through here. Make sure that compressed air can go through there. Make sure carbon choke cleaner goes through there. You can take a jet cleaner if you need to. Just a little piece of wire, stick through there. Not a very big port, so you have to use a very small strand of wire. Your pilot jet sits clear down in this carburetor, and so you want to use a small flat screwdriver, but also you want to make sure that you've got a good hold on that screw before you start turning it. This is going to be a 38 size jet. Again, you want to be able to hold it up to light and see through it. If you can't, or even if you can but you don't think it's quite clean, compressed air, blow through it. Carbon choke cleaner, blow through it. Just make sure that you can see through it, make sure there's nothing stuck in there. Now that we have those out, once we pull this top cap here, and I'll show you how to do that, we can blow through those ports there, just make sure they're free and clear. Next thing we're going to do is pull this float assembly. You can stick something small in that hole there, kind of push that pin out, grab with your fingers or a small pair of pliers, pull that pin out. Next we've got your needle and seat here, underneath here, and this is what you call the needle, this is what you call the seat. So a lot of times when you order a jet kit or a rebuild kit, a needle will come with it. Almost probably every time a jet will come with it. Needle jet will come with it. Sometimes these are replaceable seats. This one is not a replaceable seat. So if you're having issues with the seat, you're just going to have to replace the carburetor, the main body of the carburetor. A lot of times just replacing your needle is going to fix that. A lot of times with a rubber tip on these get grooved in here. Or a lot of times you see fuel coming in through your inlet here. And if it's got debris in it, it'll stick in between your needle and your seat here, holding your float open. So these floats are adjustable. You can adjust them if you slightly bend this tab up or down depending on what you're needing, more fuel, less fuel. You want to make sure you adjust it though according to your manual for height so that you're not dumping too much fuel in. You've got your air fuel screw here, and before you pull that out, you want to make sure you check the adjustment on there. So the way you do that, put your small flat screwdriver on there, take and you spin it, and you count how many turns in until it's completely seated. So spin it clockwise, half a turn, 1, 1.5, 2, and a quarter. So that's exactly where it's supposed to be. And then once you know where it's at, where it was set at, you can just pull it out, clean this port out. It's got a spring on here, a washer, and sometimes the O-rings will stay in there. So I guess all of it stayed in there, and we could pull it all out if we wanted to. But there's your idle adjust screw there. Just small tip on the end, make sure it's cleaned out. You can blow through that port as well. I'm just going to stick it back in here so we don't lose those small pieces. There's a washer, there's an O-ring, and there's a spring. And they go, I believe, in the order of O-ring, washer, spring, idle screw, but you want to double check that. So again, once you take it all the way in, then you want to back it out the amount of turns that your manual says, 1.5, 1.5, 2 1/4. My manual for my altitude shows 2 1/4 turns out. So next thing we're going to do is pull this top cap here, and this is your diaphragm will be underneath here. 4 Phillips screws to remove this cap, and I like to hold this cap to make sure that there's a spring in there in the diaphragm. You just want to make sure, probably pieces aren't going to go everywhere, but more importantly, you don't want this cap just to pop off and rip that diaphragm. It's a small, thin layer of rubber, and if it gets damaged, that diaphragm is no good. You can't repair that, or you just replace it. So that's the top cap there. This spring is actually broke, and that is the reason why we're going through this carburetor, is to replace that spring. We don't have the spring in yet, so we'll just go ahead and put this carburetor back together the way that it is, just to show you how to do it. Be careful pulling this diaphragm apart here. A lot of times they get stuck either on this cap or on this main body of the carburetor. You want to make sure that it's not stuck before you remove it. If it is, just slowly do it and pull it off there carefully. You've got your spring that sits down on this needle holder here, just a plastic holder, and it sits down right on top of that needle. And then next you've got your needle that pops out there. They make different sizes of these needles. This one's got they put a shim on there. If you have the correct size needle, you don't need a shim. So that needle just slides down into that hole, comes out the bottom tab there. Go ahead and set that on there, set that holder down in there, and then I take pliers and kind of push it down in there. Just make sure it's properly seated. And then we can put this back together. was gonna see if we could, no, almost every carburetor I've done, you can only put this slide in one direction. This one's the same way, so it won't go down one way. You wanna make sure though that when you're putting it back together, your needle slides right down into your, what would be your main jet holder area or main jet. If it doesn't slide down that place, you gotta push that slide back up and redo it, make sure it sits all the way down there. Otherwise, it's just gonna push your needle up. Now, next thing I do is take my slide and diaphragm, get it into that position there, that diaphragm. That way, when I'm going back together, and I kind of hold it up with this finger, I'll hold this slide up so that it's not all the way down. Make sure it's completely seated properly. Make sure there's no gaps or anything. And then take your spring, which this is obviously an incomplete spring. Set it on there and set your cap down on there. Make sure it's seated properly. Then you can take your thumb, hold it on there and put those screws on. If that diaphragm falls out of place or it's not sealing properly or it's leaking, then your four-wheeler's not going to run right. Your carburetor's not right. So you want to make sure that that's seated properly. Make sure these are snug, but again, you've got that O-ring, well, the diaphragm in this case, sealing that up really well. And then once we get these tightened up, I'll show you how you can make sure that that diaphragm is good. You can take your compressed air here, blow through that port there, and that'll raise your diaphragm, or it'll raise your slide. If it's catching at all or it's not going up, then you've got issues. But your diaphragm can have a small rip in it, or it can be pinched and still work properly as far as that test. So, but you want to make sure that it doesn't have any rips on it before going back together. So main jet, again, this one that had that main jet holder included with it. So we'll put that all back together and snug these up. They're brass jets going into an aluminum carburetor, so you don't have to tighten them up really tight, and you definitely don't want to round these heads off. And then your pilot jet here. Make sure, I like to make sure my screwdrivers are completely clean before I'm putting especially this jet back in, because it's so far down in there. Debris will just go right down in there. So we've got your float here and your needle here. It doesn't matter which direction you put this on there, that clip is right in the center. Slide that needle down there into that seat, take the pin. Sometimes these pins get stuck. You want to be really careful. These posts are aluminum that this pin goes through, and if you tap on those at all with a hammer or anything, it'll break those posts right off. You'll be replacing the body of your carburetor. You want to make sure you don't do that. Support it if you've got to put any kind of pressure on it. Like, double check these jets, make sure they're tight. Make sure the O-ring is good, like I said earlier. Slide this back on there. Got a couple more things to show you on this carburetor once we get this back on. Your idle here, put those screws in that mounting piece. Snug these up. Now your idle, if you turn your idle clockwise, if you're looking at your idle screw, turn it clockwise, it's going to turn your idle up. So counterclockwise is going to turn it down. So this is your throttle here. Your throttle cable is going to come right through here, down into this groove here, and that is going to, when you hit your thumb throttle, it's going to lift this, opening this butterfly, allowing more fuel and air to go through. So essentially your idle is just doing the same thing, raising this butterfly, allowing more air flow through to go through there, sucking more fuel through there. So that is a carburetor on a Kawasaki Bayou 300.